Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. February has just finished, so that means it's time to do our February wrap up and talk about all the books that I read this month. I will say there has been some highs and lows whenever it came to February. My ratings are all across the board. I feel like I gave one of each star rating. So we have quite a few things to discuss because there are definitely some books I would recommend and some that I would really encourage you to stay away from. So this should be a fun one full of a lot of opinions. As I've mentioned in quite a few recent videos, we are on the final stretch to our wedding, so there's definitely been a lot on our plates right now. I'm definitely having to balance reading with all the other things that I have going on. So I have been reading a little bit less in these first few months of the year, but I still managed to read 7 books in total, 4 of those being romance, 3 of those being fantasy. I was able to stick to my TBR pretty well. I read 5 of the 6 books. Definitely not my best month whenever it came to ratings. My average rating was a 3.32, and for my pages read, that was 2,880 pages in total. As always, I love to give a little shout out to Fable, who creates these monthly graphics. It'll give us a little bit of a sneak peek, but I also just like seeing the visuals of the books that I have read. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop on in. The first book that I read in February is definitely a testament to why you need to do some research before you buy a book. I read Fall into Temptation by Lucy Score. I did not realize that this was book 2 in a series, and I really wish I did, because not only are these books on Kindle Unlimited, I have really not liked this series whatsoever. I rated the first book last month pretty low. I just continued on with book 2 since I already owned it, but ultimately I did give this a 1.5 stars. I was not a fan of Fall into Temptation whatsoever. The entire series takes place in this small town called Blue Moon. So far in the series, we've just followed 2 brothers, and this brother's name is Beckett. He's the town mayor, very much buttoned up, prim and proper individual, and whenever a single mom moves into town with her 2 kids, she ends up renting his guest house, which is in his backyard, to where we are thrust into this small town forced proximity romance. And I ended up having the exact same conflict with this book that I had in book 1, which was that the insta-love was so stupid. There's no other way to describe it. There's absolutely no lead up to the spice and the romance that happens in these books, to the point that it's not enjoyable at all. I was literally skimming it because I had no emotional attachment to these characters. I understand how some small town romances really give the small town itself its own characterization, and it can be quite extreme. This book honestly took it to a new level. Traits and characteristics we see within the small town itself that are just absolutely absurd and ridiculous. It played a really large role in the conflict that happened and how the conflict ended up being resolved. And again, it was just so absurd. I really don't have anything to say other than I sincerely wouldn't recommend that you read these books. I am all for a silly, goofy time whenever it comes to romances, but I truly think you're not going to take away anything by reading these books. I know Lucy Score has a lot of good series that come highly recommended. I would love to give her another shot. I just don't think that this series is really worth your time, and this is just where I'm gonna put it down because this series is like 8 books in total. There's absolutely no way I'm gonna subject myself to more of this. Luckily, this is our worst book of the video, so we're just getting the worst book right out of the way, and now moving forward we can talk about some books that I actually would recommend to you. This next one I don't have a physical for. I read this as an audiobook through my library. I continued on with the Caraval series into book 2, which is called Legendary. And book 1 introduces us to 2 sisters, Donatella and Scarlet, where they get invited to this magical game that happens typically once a year called Caraval. And once they get to Caraval, Scarlet begins a quest to win the game where she'll be granted 1 wish. Now the thing about Caraval is it's pretty much a giant fever dream. You can't believe anything that you see. People can lose their sense of reality because at the end of the day, it is just a game. And we definitely saw Scarlet have a lot of ups and downs when playing the game. And while I really love the backdrop of Caraval, I did give that book a 3 stars. I did find Scarlet to be a pretty annoying character to be stuck in as a POV. So going into book 2, I was a bit more hopeful because we're following Donatella's experience now playing the game. And I would say that her story has a lot more depth to it. She's also being pulled in a lot of different directions throughout the game. You can definitely see how there's no easy choices for her. Each action is going to have a consequence. And so she has to be very selective with how she moves forward, or else she's going to end up risking everything. So I ended up giving Legendary a little bit of a higher rating than I gave Caraval. I gave this a 3.5 stars because I generally do like Donatella more than Scarlet as a POV, and I enjoyed that there wasn't just any easy path forward. It was a lot harder for her to achieve her goals than it was for Scarlet to achieve her goals. We did get introduced to a couple new characters throughout this one. Mainly we get introduced to Jax, who's the Prince of Hearts, and I know that he plays a very large role in Stephanie Garber's next series, which is Once Upon a Broken Heart, and that's really the series that I've been wanting to read from her. But I know that Caraval gives us a nice backdrop and backgrounds for the characters before we go into that next series. So at this point now I only need to get through the third book in this trilogy called Finale. I don't even know how the third book's premise is going to go because we definitely did end on a huge cliffhanger. So I'm not sure if we're going to get both sisters POVs in this next one or if we're going to stay with Donatella. Either way, I am excited to wrap up this trilogy and also hopefully continue on with the next series afterwards. Our next book I did read in a bookshelf scavenger hunt reading vlog. So if you are interested and want a lot of in-depth thoughts about this book, feel free to head over to that video. I'll make sure to link it down below. I read Love and Bloom by Lucy Eden, which is another small town romance, but we follow Emma and we get introduced to her as she's learning that she's inheriting her grandparents' farm, which is quite a surprise for her because it does not match her lifestyle whatsoever. She's a publicist in Atlanta. The farm is located in a small town in Georgia, and she hasn't spent much time at the farm within the past decade or two. And once this happens, her normal life essentially implodes, and she's forced to spend this time at the farm and ends up falling in love with it. Also, while she's falling in love with the farm, we are introduced to the farm's manager, Dan, who actually lives on the property as well. So again, we have some forced proximity going on with these two as they're living under the same roof. But even though there are a lot of similar tropes between this book and Fall Into Temptation, I would say that this one is just generally done a lot better. I really enjoyed the banter between these two. While I could have taken more time to build up to the relationship, it wasn't complete insta-love. We did have some time before these two were completely obsessed with one another. I will say there is a little plot twist going on with the farm itself and its farming operation. I did think that that was kind of fun and completely unexpected. So if you wanted to maybe see a different take on small town life, I would encourage you to pick this up. While saying that, I would also encourage you not to read the back of the book or the summary of this because I do think it totally spoils the little surprise you might have in store. As this is a 3.5, I don't think it needs to be the first thing that you pick up, but I think this would be a really fun addition for a summer read. This would be great to read by the beach or the pool. I binged this in 24 hours. It was so easy to get through, and overall this was an enjoyable read. Now moving on to something that I would encourage you to read right away. That would be The Vows by Jessica Joyce. If my tabs and annotations don't tell you enough, I don't know what will. I think my Kindle told me that I had like 83 highlights within this book. Honestly, like every single word of this could have been injected into my veins. The writing in here reminded me so much of Emily Henry, which I only say in the best way possible. And this book reminds me so much of Happy Place because this is a second chance romance. The general plot summary for this is that Georgia and Eli are forced to come together to help their best friend Adam with his wedding. Unfortunately for Adam, this wedding is cursed. Everything is going wrong. 2 weeks before the event, they have to totally change venues, and that's where we see these two exes forced together. They go up to the new venue in Napa Valley where they have a lot of history, and while being up there to basically replanned this wedding for Adam, a lot of old feelings come to the surface and we learn a lot more about why these two didn't end up working out. Why I think this book is so good and reminds me so strongly of Happy Place is that the reason they broke up is legitimate, and it's not because one of them did something terrible. You see that as they were younger, they just didn't have the tools to properly process their traumas. So one thing that I would say is such a highlight of this book is you see so much character development and growth through Eli and him really taking accountability for his traumas and how he can be a better partner moving forward. I've literally probably made Hunter sit and listen to me reading like 30 different quotes of this to him, but I'm only gonna make you guys sit through one, and I hope that this is enough to convince you to read this book. It's a privilege to have someone trust you enough to show you those pieces of themselves. The most vulnerable and tender, the least polished. It's a show of trust to let you see them first thing in the morning, in the middle of a panic attack, right after they've cried. To give you a shaky smile after a messy fight. to come to you again and again with their heart in their hands. I read that and literally cried. Like, do I need to quote this in my wedding vows? I'm seriously considering it. What a beautiful depiction of love. And there are just so many of those weaved into this story. It's literally healing to watch these two come together. I've been blessed with some 5-star romances at the start of this year. Is this my favorite one? I actually think so. And if you've watched my January wrap up, you know that I was praising 2 other 5-star reads. So I literally might have already found my best book of 2025 in February. I know there's so much more to say about this one, but I don't want to completely talk your guys' ear off about this one book. But please, if you do anything, please just add this to your list. I promise you, you're not going to regret it. This next one is actually our last romance for February, and I read a new release, which was First Time Caller by BK Borison. I do have to give it to the author and the cover designer. This is the perfect book to pick up in February. It is giving such Valentine's energy, and funnily enough, our MMC's last name on the radio show is Valentine, so it is very fitting. I'm glad I read this in this month, even though it's not my highest rated book that I read. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this book because I feel like this has really been popping off as a new release. But we follow Aiden and Lucy. Lucy is a single mom and her daughter ends up calling into Aiden's radio talk show in search of love advice for her mom. Her mom ends up getting on the phone talking to Aiden, and their clip together goes viral. The radio show ends up bringing these two together and they end up spending a lot more time together, and their love story grows from there. If you've ever seen those videos of people giving like a silent review for a book, I feel like my silent review of this would be like, so I would say the first half of this book, I was like, oh, 4 stars. So cute. Not anything that's going to change my life, but like so cute. Then in the middle to about 70%, we had a couple awkward things happen and I felt like the story was just progressing pretty dang slowly. Then once the spice and stuff got introduced, it really didn't work for me. The second half was definitely kind of a nosedive in what I thought the rating was going to be. Since the first half was so cute and I loved the introduction that these two had, I'm gonna give it a 3. Ultimately 3 stars I do recommend. Now if it's just singular a 3, it's a pretty weak recommendation. So this book isn't bad, it's just these characters weren't my favorite, and that's okay. Not all of them can be the X-Vows, so definitely room for improvement. I'm not going to write off this author completely. This is the same author that wrote the Love Light Farm series, so I will read more by them. This just simply wasn't one of my favorite romances. The next book I read was The Sapling Cage by Margaret Killjoy. This is a YA fantasy where we follow a coming-of-age story for Laurel, who is a trans character who wants to enter into the world of witchcraft. Now, witches in this society generally are only women. Since Laurel was born a boy, they end up impersonating one of their friends to take their spot whenever the witch coven comes to claim them at the age of 16. And we see Laurel get introduced to not only the witches and their background, but more of the country that they live in and some of the evilness going on inside of it. I really did want to rate this book higher. At minimum, I wanted to give this book a 3 stars just for all that it was trying to do with its storytelling, but ultimately I couldn't justify anything above a 2.5. The writing in here is very jarring. I was so shocked to see that in some of the Goodreads reviews, people were saying that this is a YA book that reads as an adult book. And I truly could not disagree more. This is a YA book that reads almost at an elementary school level. It gives the reader absolutely no credit on their ability to understand world building. It is written in such simplistic language that it also reads as completely emotionless. And I literally could not give a shit about the story because there was nothing making me care about what was going on. And that was really sad to say because I felt like the author could have had a lot of opportunities to create an interesting story that hasn't been done often. It also was bizarre to me that the main plot of this story is watching Laurel's first few months with the witches and the start of her training to become a witch. No magical training takes place in this entire book. They almost go through like an assassin's training fight camp instead of actually a witch training, which I just found completely bizarre. And I just got the impression that Margaret Killjoy just bit off a little bit more than they could chew when trying to create this world, create this backstory, and develop these characters. I think they just tried to do a little bit too much, and it ended up falling so flat for me. I wish I could recommend this more because it is the start of a trilogy, but unfortunately I don't think this is going to be a series that I continue. I am rapidly losing light, so I need to do this last review very quickly, but that is good because I have been filming all of my reviews and reactions for the Throne of Glass series for a separate reading vlog, so I will keep this one very short and sweet. I chose violence whenever I gave this rating, and I decided to be so nitpicky with it. I gave this a 4.25. This and Air of Fire just really haven't been my favorites. I have not loved our transition to the multiple POVs because I do feel like we're just getting too many POVs. We're switching POVs too quickly to the point where I don't care about almost anyone's story because I'm not seeing their story very often. I am happy with where we end off this story, but I will say it felt a little bit predictable and extremely convenient. So for that, not saying that there's nothing good about the story because there are a lot of good things. I had been debating about, is this a 4 or is this a 4.5? And I gave it a 4.25 just because, like, I know Sarah J Maas can do better. I know I can be picky with her books because I have read better than this. So this was the final book that I read in February, and now I am so terrified to go into the tandem read. That also is just like probably not helping my ratings for this because I'm dreading the next 2 books. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know. I'm so sad to say that I think the Throne of Glass series has gone down a little bit over time as I'm reading more books. I hope that we're able to end strong because I have only heard amazing things about the series. This light is going fast, so I'm gonna have to do the world's quickest outro. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy. I know we're a little bit all over the place with ratings this month, but I have like 12 other months of reading wrap-ups if you want to go ahead and check those out as well. For now, this is where I will love you and leave you, but before you leave, go ahead, drop in the comments what was your favorite book that you read in February and what's something that you're looking forward to reading in March. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys!